Falcon!
When it comes to Japanese superheroes, you'd be hard-pressed to find any bigger, both figuratively and literally, than Ultraman. Ultraman is arguably one of the most iconic Japanese superheroes out there, with the Ultra franchise having a massive impact not just on Tokusatsu, but overall pop culture. Which is why in this introduction to Ultraman, I'll be going through what the series is all about, a brief history of the franchise, its legacy and appeal, and finally get into some recommendations. Keep in mind, while I have watched my fair share of Ultraman, I have by no means seen everything Ultraman, and wanted to make this video in order to help people both learn and get into the Ultraman franchise. So before we get any deeper in this video, what exactly is Ultraman all about? A giant of light from outer space, known as Ultraman, comes down to Earth either fusing with a human host or disguising themselves as a human to defend Earth from various monsters and aliens, usually with the aid of some sort of patrol team. Now, unlike Kamen Rider, which I've previously made an introduction video on, Ultraman doesn't have an extreme shift in its older and newer series, at least in terms of how they play out, as the newer or Heisei/Reiwa era series still build off on a lot of the foundations of the older Showa era series, in being a nice balance of intriguing sci-fi and giant monster and superhero fun. However, towards the second part of the Heisei era, we got the new generation heroes, which were shorter in episode length, going from the previous 30 to 50 episodes to being somewhere in the 20s. There's also much more of a toyetic focus on the new gen series, as well as way more callbacks and references to previous Ultra series and events, which seems like where the franchise will be staying with going forward. When talking about the history of Ultraman, you gotta talk about the franchise's lead creator, Eiji Tsuburaya, a special effects legend who worked on many of Toho's monster movies throughout the 50s and 60s. The most notable of which, of course, being Godzilla, in which he played a massive role in Japanese filmmaking and Tokusatsu itself with the use of detailed miniatures as well as the technique of summation. After his time in Toho, he later started Tsuburaya Productions to bring his special effects work to the small screen. Tsuburaya would still stay close with Toho, who helped with some of the earlier Ultra series, as well as Godzilla director himself, Ishiro Honda, directing some episodes for the franchise in Return of Ultraman. However, the first Ultra series that came out of Tsuburaya Productions wasn't actually Ultraman, but rather Ultra Q, a sci-fi mystery series often described as the Japanese Twilight Zone, only with giant monsters. Ultra Q was one of the most expensive Japanese shows produced at the time, bringing the wonder and chaos of giant monsters to the small screen. The show was a massive success, and after it wrapped up in 1966, there's demand for more, in which a lot of the ideas of Ultra Q were taken and given a more superhero angle, which of course leads us to the debut of Ultraman, which also became an instant classic with its special effects, interesting sci-fi plotlines, and of course giant monster battles and heroics. With Ultraman doing so well for itself, there of course had to be a follow-up, which then brought us Ultra 7, which with its darker and more sci-fi focused plots, wound up being an even bigger hit than the first Ultraman series. With the immense popularity of the Ultras, the franchise began to grow even bigger, with many more TV shows, spin-offs, movies, various manga, anime, comics, adaptations, stage plays, commercials, a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, and trust me, a whole lot more were made. Though it's not like it was entirely smooth sailing for the Ultraman franchise. There was problems with the TV series finding a right balance with its audience, with some of the following Ultra shows either being too kiddie or too dark. There were also hiatuses, financial issues, and probably the most pesky of them all, branching out to international markets, which sadly was way more of a pain in the butt for Tsuburaya than it should have been, mainly due to the giant and thankfully recently resolved legal battle against Chayo Productions, a Thai company that worked with Tsuburaya for some films that in turn tried taking the international rights of the Ultra series away from Tsuburaya Productions. If you want to know more about this as well as the bizarre history of Ultraman being released in the West, then I highly recommend the video by Vintage Henshin regarding the topic. Ultraman as a franchise has a legacy as big as Ultraman himself, with the series' success in Japan really pushing what could be done in Tokusatsu, allowed for new franchises to come out and get a bit experimental, eventually leading to Toei's and Shotaro Ishinomori's Kamen Rider and later on Super Sentai, thus completing the big three of Tokusatsu as we know it today. In a sense, Ultra 7 might have been the progenitor of collectible monsters, which would later take over the world in the 90s. As in his series, Ultra 7 could use monster capsules to summon kaiju to assist them in battle. Now doesn't that seem familiar? And considering Pokemon series creator Satoshi Tajiri made Pokemon with a lot of the things that he loved in his own childhood, which included Tokusatsu like Godzilla, Kamen Rider, and Ultraman, it's not too much of a stretch to see the influence of Ultraman and Tokusatsu itself on Pokemon. One of my personal favorite manga series, Kinnikuman, initially started off as an Ultraman parody, before evolving into its own thing as a superhero wrestling series, which, considering Ultramen still technically wrestle with kaiju, I wonder if the whole wrestling aspect of Kinnikuman still came from Ultraman itself. And while the series has moved on from just being an Ultraman parody, it still features some love for the franchise, with Kinnikuman's son and lead of Kinnikuman Nisei, or Ultimate Muscle, being named Mantaro, which is a confirmed reference to Ultraman Taro, who was also the son of a powerful Ultra. Really, over the years, Ultraman references can be found practically everywhere. Anime, manga, cartoons, comics, movies, you name it. Of course, when talking about Ultraman influences and references, none are more well known and greater than two famous directors. One of them being Guillermo del Toro, a known fan of the Ultra series and used Ultraman as well as various mecha series as influence on the movie Pacific Rim. Tsuburaya even noted Del Toro's love for the franchise in Ultraman X, in which they named a planet after him, which is really sweet. However, the next director heavily influenced by the Ultra franchise is none other than Hideaki Anno, who is best known for directing Neon Genesis Evangelion, and a bit more currently, Shin Godzilla. Anno has admitted Eva having a lot of influence from Ultraman, and has even gone on record in saying that he currently wouldn't be where he is now if it was not for Ultraman. The man's student film in college was an Ultraman movie short in which he casted himself as Ultraman, which would eventually circle back into being something great as he is currently working on Shin Ultraman, alongside with his friend and collaborator Shinji Higuchi, who worked as special effects director on the wonderful Heisei Gamera trilogy, which I also highly recommend. And guess what? Higuchi is also a massive Ultraman fan. So I was already excited for Shin Ultraman, but knowing that the people working behind it are also very passionate fans for the franchise has me even more excited. Getting into the obvious with the appeal of Ultraman are of course its giant monster battles, which are always cool, seeing all the destruction and cool monsters getting blown away by our giant alien heroes. However, Tsuburaya has perfected giant monster battles, which is to be expected out of a franchise that's been doing it since the 60s, as the series from the very beginning has done an amazing job in selling the impact and scale of these clashes amongst giants, with every series I've watched so far having a great number of shots and scenes that have really wowed me. Especially with a lot more of the recent series that I would argue do a better job in portraying giant monster fights than most big budget movies. Then there's the sci-fi themes of the franchise, since as I mentioned before, Ultraman is not just a great superhero series, it is also a great sci-fi series, with a good amount of Ultra series giving a lot of focus on human and alien relations, the exploration of space and science, as well as the morality of fighting various aliens and monsters in the first place. Along with that, you have the ever-expansive universe and lore of Ultraman, as unlike Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, which for the most part have each series pretty unrelated to each other except for the occasional crossover special, anniversary series, or even rarer sequel series, Ultraman over its run has made a multiverse for itself. While each series can be enjoyed on its own and are self-contained in a sense, as for the most part each Ultra series takes place on a different Earth from the previous series, they still all share the same multiverse. Almost everything in Ultraman is connected somehow, especially now more than ever thanks to the new generation heroes I mentioned earlier. However, don't let that alarm you too much when getting into a series, as even if an Ultra series you decided to pick up refers to previous stuff and events, you can still enjoy the show on its own, with whatever you don't know being explained briefly, or just being added in for the sake of fan service for longtime Ultraman fans. For example, my first Ultraman was Ultraman G'd, which in order to fully understand from the start would require you to watch 2 seasons of a spin-off series called Mega Monster Battle, then watch its 2 movies that introduce the characters of Ultraman Zero and Ultraman Belial, who are both important to G'd's story. But despite me going into Ultraman G'd blind from the rest of the Ultra franchise, I still really love G'd. In fact, I can still say it's one of my favorite Ultraman series and possibly favorite Tokusatsu series. Going in blind didn't hurt my overall experience, in fact it made me want to seek out more Ultraman. After all, the way these Tokusatsu shows are made and marketed, almost every series in its debut will be someone's first within its franchise. That being said, the lore of the Ultra multiverse is super expansive, constantly growing, and honestly I wonder if it's ever possible to fully grasp it all. As not only is there loads of material from the TV series, but there's also side stories, movies, net specials, spin-offs, anime, manga, stage plays. That's right, even the stage plays can feature canon material in the Ultraman multiverse. And these stage plays don't even have to be featured in Japan. Quite recently, the Malaysian stage play Ultraman, Ultraman Reboot, was recently brought into the Ultra canon in the net special Ultraman Galaxy Fight. With Ultraman, almost everything could be canon if you give it long enough, so I'm just counting down the days till Ultra Neon makes his debut in the Ultra canon. While all this may seem like a lot to take in at first, just know that being all up to date with the lore is not required at all to enjoy anything within the franchise. And looking more into the positives of this big continuity, if you're a person that likes digging up on the lore of a franchise, then congrats, as we've already discussed, Ultraman is totally for you, as you can easily spend hours just looking up the lore and origins of Ultras themselves, as well as their varied history and culture. Also, thanks to this big continuity, we get to see Ultras both old and new constantly interact with each other, which is really awesome, as over the years, Ultras from the past have grown up and become parents or mentors for a new generation, which is super unique for a Tokusatsu series, and kinda helps the Ultra franchise feel like something of a comic book universe like DC or Marvel. However, another thing that makes Ultraman so great, especially these days, is that it's extremely accessible when compared to a lot of other Tokusatsu series. As mentioned before, Tsuburaya really did try to get Ultraman overseas before Child Productions put a lot of that on hold. Still, back in the day, Ultraman and Ultra 7 were dubbed in English, and there were a few more tries on that dubbing later on. We had that previously mentioned Hanna-Barbera cartoon that was supposed to become something more, as well as an actual American and Australian adaptation in Ultraman Powered and Great. And unlike Power Rangers, which sort of Frankenstein-stitched American original content with Super Sentai footage, Ultraman Powered and Great are what you expect out of an Ultraman series just produced in a different country. Beyond that, we have an ongoing manga and Netflix anime series, a Marvel comic book series, and thanks to Mill Creek, loads of Ultra series, both old and new, getting official English releases, with quite a few of them being up on streaming services. Not to mention the Tsuburaya YouTube channel, where random episodes of various Ultra series are uploaded from time to time, as well as the most recent Ultra series, at least as of this video, Ultraman Z, being streamed the same day as Japan with English subtitles on the YouTube channel, alongside the previously mentioned Ultra Galaxy Fight web series, which is huge for a Tokusatsu franchise. This might not seem like a super big deal for anime fans, especially these days, but trust me, this is insane, as so many Tokusatsu fans have no choice but to wait for fan subs in order to watch these shows, and now we have so many more proper, official methods of enjoying these awesome shows. Also, like, while we're on the topic of the YouTube channel, they occasionally upload these really small, wholesome videos with the Ultras saying thanks, as well as words of encouragement, and like, gosh darn it, isn't Ultraman just the greatest? Like, look at him with his little YouTube plaque, or I guess huge YouTube plaque. No thank you, Mr. Ultraman. Thank you. Alright, before we wrap up here, it's time to get into some recommendations. Keep in mind, I haven't seen everything Ultraman. As we discussed earlier, that's quite the feat. But that also includes some of the series I'm going to be recommending here, as my recommendations for newcomers here is going to be based on my personal experiences, as well as what I've seen from Ultra fans online. First off, both the original Ultraman and Ultra 7 are great shows that built the foundation for every Ultraman series after it, so of course they would make for an ideal starting place for anyone interested in getting into the franchise. However, you also got Ultraman Tiga, the first Heisei Ultraman, or at least first Heisei in terms of TV series produced in Japan. Tiga does a good job in feeling like a reintroduction to the Ultra franchise for a new era. And if you unfortunately can't handle the older special effects of the Showa era shows, Tiga would make a great start in getting classic Ultraman with more modern effects. Then there's Ultraman Mebius, often considered the best anniversary season in Tokusatsu, as it does a lot to introduce and flesh out a lot of the franchise's long-lasting lore for both longtime fans and newcomers alike, on top of just being an overall fantastic show in its own right. And now we need a rep for the new generation heroes. The Jeed fanboy in me really wants to say Jeed, which again can still be an excellent starter, but really when thinking about it and seeing what I've seen online, I feel Ultraman Orb might do a lot better for someone who's new to the franchise, with it being able to stand on its own, along with the series' really fun and unique lead and his rival, and the series itself being a good display of the legacy of Ultraman. Again, these are just my personal recommendations for newcomers. Almost any series would work out as a starter for someone, and I'm sure there will be plenty of people in the comments leaving their own recommendations as well. Honestly, just look at an Ultra series, and if you think that Ultraman looks cool, then just go right ahead. But with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and are now ready to get into the wide and wonderful multiverse that is the Ultraman franchise. As always, I'm Mr.FalconPunch. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and maybe share this around to some potential Ultraman fans. Stay safe, and peace out.